All right. Hi, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about working groups in this CEO learning session. My name is Josh from GitLab Learning and Development. I'm joined here with Sid, GitLab CEO and co-founder, and Stella, the chief of staff. So we're going to be talking about working groups, when to create one, how to do it, and what are the benefits. And I'm going to ask Stella the first question. So Stella, what is a working group at GitLab?
Thanks, Josh. So this is directly from the handbook, but it's an arrangement of people with different functions. It has defined roles and responsibilities and is tasked with achieving a high impact business goal. It disbands when the goal is achieved, defined by exit criteria, so GitLab doesn't accrue bureaucracy.
Great. Thanks, Stella. And Sid, when would you start one?
When working asynchronous is too slow. So a working group is expensive. Like you're gonna have meetings with busy people. So you only want to do it for important things, but some important things can be done asynchronous. But asynchronous tends to take more time than synchronous. So if you have an important problem that needs to be solved fast, you'd start a working group for it. And at some point you should grow out of the working group. You find a solution to it, you form stable counterparts, and the working group is no longer needed.
Thanks, Sid. And I'm curious, why is it important to have an executive stakeholder included in the working group?
Yeah, every working group is cross-functional, so it will be different functions. And then at some point you might have a problem where kind of it needs to go up the chain to the other function. Those functional chains meet in the e-group. So it's important to have an e-group member on board in case there's ever a need for something like that.
All right. And Stella, how may this differ from how working groups operate at other companies?
I'm going to build a bit upon what Sid said, but we are very cross-functionally oriented. And that means that for some people, this is kind of their key cross-functional interface. And people wind up working together in a new way, or maybe haven't been part of a working group or collaboration before. So I think as an organization, we have a bit less muscle here. And it's something that we kind of need to build upon and be thoughtful about when we launch these. The intent to disband is always there in working group definitions, but for some companies that could be 3 years. And for us, I think we look at this as something that's not always the most efficient way of operating, isn't something we want to have for an extended period of time. So it would be a rarity to see something go past that kind of quarter or 2 quarter mark. And at other pieces, we always think about efficiency. So we may be in this way of operating, we may find we're halfway through the quarter and find better ways to do things. We're kind of happy to iterate and revisit that model. And part of that is that bias for async that Sid mentioned, where if we see opportunities to cut down the number of meetings, we will do it. If we find ways to collaborate better through an issue or Google Doc, we'll iterate. So there's not a quick, always use process, and there's not someone kind of managing the same way each time.
That makes sense. And, I think one thing when I first started working at GitLab was that we don't employ project managers. And Sid, why is that the case? And what are the benefits of not having project managers?
Yeah, one caveat, we do employ project managers when we need to interface with other organizations. That is super complex, and project managers are a real benefit there, and that can be customers or partners or anything else. Internally, we don't have project managers. And that's because we want to have a lot of agency and responsibility for our team members. A project manager who kind of asks you the status of work and then puts it in a tool and shows it to other people, makes those updates. We want people to do that directly. Everyone at GitLab can use GitLab as a tool to keep people up to date. And we want the directly responsible individual to do that. And in case something doesn't go right, there's accountability on the team. The solution is not to hire a project manager. We want people who are self-managing, who are a manager of one, and not having internal project managers allows us to kind of keep people accountable for that. Because when you get project managers, the first people who will leave are the ones who are really good managers of one, because they don't need a project manager.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I've never heard it explained that way, and I think the concept of the DRI and managers of one, you don't need a project manager because we're all managers of one and DRIs for our respective, actions and activities. So, Stella, I'd be curious, given the importance of project management, how should working groups organize for effective project management?
Absolutely. So there's a number of key players. I think two to highlight are the facilitators. This is the person organizing the meetings, making sure it runs on time, making sure things that are followed and actioned. It's playing part of that project management role. The other piece is the DRI that's highlighted. So that's the person who makes sure things are moving and is responsible for the ultimate outcome, needs to make sure the right people are there, nothing falls through the cracks. And I think that since we don't have that kind of muscle, because we don't do it all the time, the DRI will also be the person who, if we find out that there's no function that traditionally handles a piece of work, that person's responsible for finding out who will be responsible, and that's a key part of the responsibility. The other piece is the working group members and making sure that they're aware of the ask for them and they know how to pull other people in as needed, and that's going to vary by project. Executive stakeholder, I think Sid already spoke to that kind of escalation point, that sponsor, that person who can represent something to e-group if needed and be a tiebreaker. And something here as well, just how do you manage it itself? We have a lot of great tools within GitLab. So there's an opportunity to do a lot of great dog fooding. I've seen great management through issues and epics. At times, Google Doc is also a best friend.
Great, thanks, Ella. And Sid, I'd be curious, how can team members use GitLab for project management?
Yeah, there's some great features in GitLab. Most people are familiar with the issue tracker, but also we have epics functionality to aggregate that on a higher level. There's a roadmaps function where you can see a timeline of your project, and also the static site editor might be handy to maintain the working group pages and other handbook pages that you might be changing.
Yeah, it's a great, GitLab is great for project management. And, I think, Stella as well, I'd be curious just to understand, what operational learnings have we had from recent working groups? Where have they struggled, and what has helped make groups successful?
I haven't done a poll, so I can't speak to everyone with the working group happening at the moment. But some things I've noticed, just being really clear on time commitments and expectations for members. People go into it and some come with the expectation we'll be there for the meeting and that's their participation. Others come ready to just roll up their sleeves. So I think really articulating up front, like what needs to be achieved and what is each person's role in that. And we iterate, so we'll discover and change over time, but trying to help people understand the need for their role up front is really important. And then project scope is part of that as well. So what is the entirety of the project? And a good example that I came up with recently in the working group that I was part of is we had this big piece where marketing was really key. And there was someone from external communications in the room. So we said, great, you're in charge of marketing. And after a few meetings, that person said, oh, I don't think I'm really, that person. And she was absolutely right. There's probably 5 other people we had to plug in to make that work, and 15 by the end of the project. So that's a proliferation you don't want of people in most cases. But I think it's really important to kind of get what is the overall scope of this? Who are the people who are needed? Let's make sure we engage them at the right times in the right ways and help them understand our expectations for them. Another one is just understanding the urgency and adapting your process to it. You probably don't want to have daily stand-ups. I wound up in a working group where we were having daily stand-ups for something. And that's a sign that things have gone a little bit off the rails. So you do those when you need them, then you come back to async and preference for lighter communication as needed. But I think it's adapting that process for different groups and based on urgency and needs. Dog fooding, again, try to dog food when you can. There's needs for sometimes a Google Doc for reasons like confidentiality. So know the whole arsenal, I shouldn't say arsenal, but know all your options for tools. Know what you can work within, look at past examples of what's happened with projects. I know something that was really useful for me is oh, great, what have working groups done before me? How can I set up a project like them? How do I look at roadmap very effectively? And since a lot of people who wind up leading these working groups may have never run one before, even participated in one before at GitLab, I think don't reinvent the wheel because there's a lot of great tools out there and a lot of great examples of dog fooding. And then a final thought is just think about who needs to be informed and how to inform them. There's a lot of people interested in a lot of projects. There's sometimes limitations on how you can share. It could be passive, or it could be even something for a project I was part of, every week on the e-group agenda would be there as a passive link, which is if you're really interested, click through here and find it. But you never want to under communicate with folks who might need to know or might need to weigh in.
Yeah, those are all great points. I really liked how you talked about referencing what's been done in the past as well. Like I know on the working groups handbook page, there's a lot of links to previous examples of working groups to reference. So that's really helpful. And Sid, just lastly here, we try to be transparent, but some working groups handle limited access information. What are your thoughts on transparency in this context?
Yeah, as transparent as is reasonable and practical. Every working group for sure should be on our list of working groups. If you can't give any more information about what the working group does, you can link to our private handbook where you can elaborate on that. If it's more limited than that, if it's limited access, then you can, for example, work in a Google Doc. We have a system of code names in GitLab, so if you're doing something that's not public, don't name the working group exactly what you're doing. If that's confidential, you can use a code name instead. I think for the success of the working group, it's really important that anybody else can quickly see what the working group is about. You're going to have requests to non-working group members over time, so it's important that that is super clear. There's clear exit criteria to quickly get people up to speed as you make a request to them.
Great. And, I think I just wanted to thank you all for your time and really deep diving working groups. If there's anything else left to share or talk about, feel free to throw it out there in this topic.
Thanks for organizing. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Sid.